moved down to the borough of Richmond. I live in Twickenham, my constituency, in the mid-70s. I'd come from Glasgow, and after a short time after I'd been there, there were these people I thought initially were a bit weird, who used to come around collecting our newspapers. And I didn't quite understand what it was all about. But anyway, somebody explained to me the concept of recycling. And then it was explained that this was the local Liberal Democrats, or the Liberals as they then were. And I got interested. But it was long before they'd made any kind of electoral breakthrough, that it was the association in the minds of the local residents with saving the planet, recycling, environmental issues, that were the first thing that actually got people hooked on the party, as it then was, and of course it then grew through local government. My engagement in the issues came from a slightly different direction. I was employed for a time working for the Commonwealth Secretary General, Sonny Ramphal, and he in turn got me involved in something called the Brundtland Commission in the mid-1980s, and I was asked eventually to write the report, and it was that report that produced the concept of our common future and sustainable development. It's still a bit controversial, and somebody was asking me in the hall the other day about how do you reconcile economic growth with sustainability in the environment. I mean, that argument goes on, but it was the Brundtland Commission in a way that defined the debate. And I went on from there to produce a report for the Commonwealth Prime Ministers. It was 1987, which was I think the first intergovernmental report on climate change. And at the time, it was thought it was a rather wacky subject. I mean, the scientists in the mid-80s were starting to produce serious reports. The Bellagio conference, some of you may remember, but it was hardly in the mainstream. And when we published our report, we actually got some news in the Sun newspaper, but it was all about, the pavements will melt and they're completely off the wall. But I think that was my first awareness, serious awareness, as a result of working in the subject, about some of the potential for catastrophic change that the scientists were beginning to anticipate at that time, and that led into the intergovernmental panel on climate change, and of course what has happened since. And it was partly on the back of that I got hired by an international oil company, Shell. I worked for them for some years. And although, people criticised the oil majors, I think to their great credit, they had understood in the late 1980s, long before the campaigning groups, that the global warming phenomenon was potentially a major threat to their existence. Why produce carbon if it's going to cause all these problems? You began to get serious thinking, scenario planning about how do you move to a hydrogen-based rather than a carbon-based economy, and actually as a result of the work that was done at that time, we moved towards gas rather than oil and coal. So that this thing was quite long in their gestation. But when I moved into Parliament in the 90s, this was one of the issues which our party, I think, very distinctively pursued throughout the years initially of Labour government. People like Andrew Stunnell here were very much at the centre of all that. And when we got into government, although a lot of the battles took place behind closed doors, one of the most difficult issues on which we engaged with the Tories was about the greening of the economy. Cameron and Osborne had engaged with it in a fairly superficial way. If you may remember, going to the North Pole and hugging huskies and doing a few superficially attractive things, which certainly helped to detoxify the Tory party. But when we were in government, we began to realise that they weren't willing to take difficult decisions on this matter. We got into perpetual sort of conflict with them about it. We did in the process, I think, achieve some measurable things. Setting up the Green Investment Bank, which I carried through but was initially promoted by Chris Hume. It was a big battle, but we got it established. Of course, you know what's since happened. The Tories have sold it off to some Australian company whose commitment to the environment is questionable at best. But it did a lot of important things while it existed, particularly in offshore wind. Certainly in my department, we did a lot of work around the industrial strategy as it affected the greening of the economy. We managed to persuade Siemens, for example, to put up a blade factory in Hull, just there. So it's expanding at the very moment. Andrew did a lot of work on zero carbon homes. I know it was a constant battle to get this concept established and get it past the Treasury. I absolutely hated the whole idea. And Ed Davey particularly, fought endless battles, often successfully, to make sure that we got the proper level of investment in renewables. The consequence of which is we do have now the legacy, a very substantial wind sector, offshore wind, and it remains. And it's to everybody's amazement, I think some of the people who were committed to renewables understood that this would happen, but that the cost curve fell very dramatically. We've now got wind coming in at the same price as gas, falling still. We were blocked in attempts to provide the same kind of support to solar power, but nonetheless, I think quite a lot was accomplished, and we're now seeing a regression. But of course, all that was because the party was committed to green policies, and we had a bedrock of support in our own party to fall back on. So we're deeply indebted to the Green Lib Dems, essentially, for having laid the political infrastructure. I think a lot of those battles are now having to be fought again. There is a danger, of course, with all this Brexit preoccupation at the moment, that the green issues fall off the agenda. I don't believe they should, and I don't believe the two issues affect each other adversely. I think European cooperation is partly about the environment, but nonetheless there is a danger of it slipping off the agenda. We know the Tories' commitment has shrunk. I know Gove is trying to revive their credential in this area, not totally convincingly. But so there are big battles to be fought. I want to make absolutely sure that the green issues are one of our USPs. I would hope that when the next election comes, whenever it is, maybe 2-3 years, we have 4 or 5 key trademark themes, and we've got 1 or 2 already, in terms of health service, but I want environment or some aspect of it to be absolutely up there. It's something that we've got to clarify our thinking on, decide what our priorities are, and find ways of expressing it in a punchy, aggressive way that actually resonates with people. I think the final point I would say is this. There is a lot of political upheaval going on. There is a certain amount of political realignment that is potentially happening. One of the things I did in the general election, it was controversial within the party. Not everybody in the party is happy about it. But I did strike an arrangement with Caroline Lucas that we would not contest her seat, and she agreed in turn not to contest mine and Richmond. And actually, more than that, something remarkable happened. Kind of friendships were established. I had the Green candidate actually going around the doorsteps with me, campaigning jointly. I felt we'd entered into a kind of social contract with them, and in the local elections in a few weeks' time, we've agreed to let the Greens have some of the slots on our list of candidates. Of course, we've got multi-vendor awards, and some wards we're letting them have 1 of the 3. And I know, as I say, I know this is controversial, not everybody approves of it, but I think it is quite important that when we're essentially fighting the same battle, we should be pragmatic and work with other people who share the same values. So I think that's an argument that is probably going to grow in volume as months pass, but I've made it very clear where I stand on the issue. But just thank you for what you do. Thank you for inviting me along. I'm afraid I'm going to be very rude and go along very soon to the President's reception, but Thank you for thinking of me, and I'm glad to have had the opportunity to come and briefly talk to you. Thank you.
Before we give a vote of thanks to Vince, if we could just, there's a couple of question opportunity slots if anybody has some questions. Yep.
Councillor Fred Hughes, I'm a local councillor, and one of the things that you're talking about, front and centre, next one of the things I've tried to do is get an offshore energy lagoon off Southport here, which is I've had Swansea consultants come up and speak to people here, and then because the government wouldn't give them a strike rate, they're actually making people redundant there. So this is for when you're talking about wind and solar. Now obviously the sun doesn't shine all the time, but you get a base load from the sea, and so to have tidal power, which I think is the second biggest in the world on tidal power, so to have that front and centre in our thing, because the added value is not just I'm saying not just having the lagoon, but having wind turbines on it, the added value protecting the coast from the road.
Can you make it a question?
Yeah. So can we have this front and centre? Because
yes, I think the answer is yes, and I'm sorry I didn't mention it in my brief contributions, because I think the tidal lagoon idea, which is Swansea Bay but Swansea Bay plus, I think there's a difference between the narrow project and a chain of lagoons in terms of the basic economics. I would actually like that to be one of the central things that we're campaigning for. I was in Wales about 5 weeks ago, went to see the people who were developing it, and it's a great idea. As you say, people are already gearing up for it. The Welsh Government has agreed to put some money into it, and remarkably, the British Treasury actually has approved it. And for reasons that I don't fully understand, my former department, which is now amalgamated with Energy, BAYES, is blocking it. There is some, I don't know, rather arcane thinking going on. But it's very clear that the tidal lagoon idea isn't just very good in terms of low carbon energy, but if you're willing to take a long-term view about discounting the future, it's good economics, and we should be getting behind it. And I like to think there was one of the things we did do in the coalition that has helped. One of the things I did was set up a network of what we call catapults, which are taking technology and developing them to commercial application. And one of the catapults relates to new renewable energy, and it's based in Glasgow. And they've done a lot of the pioneering work on making sure that the tidal machines work with maximum efficiency. And so if the lagoons are to proceed, and I think it's basically talking about the Severn Estuary, possibly with Merseyside, I think also has quite a high differential between high and low tide. It will at least partly due to the foundations which we laid. But thank you for raising that. I really do think we should make tidal lagoons very much at the centre of our thinking.
Quite a general question?
This is pointed in my direction. Thank you very much, Vince. I'm Mona Chowdhury from Newbury in West Berkshire. And I'm a newbie, Vince. I signed up last October, and what I have found is that the green aspect of our party is not very prominent, and we profess to be the greenest party amongst the three party aspect. So when can we have that in place, please?
No, well, thank you for saying that. I think it does require something catchy. Politics is is retail. You've got to have something in the shop window that people recognise and identify with you. And partly because in the coalition government we sort of half completed a lot of things. There's nothing at the moment, possibly excepting tidal lagoons, which are just distinctive and people can associate with us. But we've got to find a way of doing it. Simply saying we're green, well, okay, I mean, anybody can say that. It's got to be linked to some particular commitment.
I'm Nick Pine from Bromsgrove, and I've worked in renewables and environmental technology for the last 15 years, including on the tidal turbine, marine current turbines turbine, which was a demonstrated project in Australia. think I visited Brighton not so long ago and spoke with Green Party activists down there, and I think tie-ups between the Lib Dems and Greens are a very, very good idea. But one of the big wins that often gets lost is the fact that British industry could do a lot more with this evolving technology in tidal, which is about 15 years behind wind. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts on promoting that, and actually, because people want to see more jobs, actually banging that drum on our behalf.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just repeat what I said. I think that's exactly what we should be doing. I mean, the way to, I think, promote green arguments, which can, to the sceptical and particularly kind of working class audiences, sound a little bit effete, kind of, middle class people obsessing about things. The way to make it real is to link it to jobs and job prospects. I think that's exactly the kind of argument we need to make more strong.
One of the things that Britain has is the tidal movement right round the country every 12 hours. And the tidal races, you only have to stand between an island and the mainland, anywhere around the country, and see the power that's going through. And I would have thought we could be developing turbines in the water to get energy from the tidal races.
Well, a lot of experimentation has gone on. I mean, there are particular areas north of Caithness where the tidal movements are particularly helpful. But the problem is some of those quite remote areas, the transmission costs eliminate some of the gain.
I think of Holyhead.
Yes, well, indeed.
And Bangor, yeah.
But I think if it's going to work, the place to start is South Wales, because you have this combination of very suitable geography, supportive government, local government anyway. You've got an industrial base nearby that can provide the both the building works and then the subsequent industrial support.
Just going to ask you a question about waste actually. Obviously we've seen in the news very recently about kind of single-use plastics, and I know the government recently have brought out something about paper cups and paper cup tax and that sort of thing, which seems to have disappeared now, or they're not taking that forward. And what's your view on as a party having a much stronger stance on sort of trying to get rid of single-use plastics out of the supply chain and looking at new alternatives coming to market that we can actually encourage to take?
Well, it is something we've been banging on about quite a long time, and plastic cups were one of the things we talked about. I mean, there may be people in the audience probably know a lot more about this than I do, but I mean, what we have been arguing for are much more substantial tax incentives. I mean, a charge which is much more significant and will change behaviour, because the cost that the government's talking about is very minor. So I don't know, is there anything else we should be saying?
I think we could maybe make that case a bit stronger. Certain plastics, like I know. So I work at university, and there's a student union campaign about saying no to the straw, for example, and things like that I think are a good message. And I don't really see the two major parties really taking that seriously, but that is actually a good way of, we were talking before about how do we get more young people involved with the Green Lib Dems, and is that something that we could use to say, actually this is an easy win, a quick win, but we could all get behind it, and it's a simple message to say, right, come on, let's just make something happen, and give a good message to young people and to the green movement as a whole.
But it's got to be something a bit edgy, and having quite a tough charge on the use of inappropriate plastics is probably the best place to start.
Tamara Galloway. I've been the Green candidate for Orpington constituency in the general election 3 times. I'm here as a guest of Michael Hall. What do you think about the idea of, firstly, a more official link between the Greens and the Lib Dems? And secondly, going back to the tax situation, my personal opinion that why is it that we have VAT charged on either restaurant or just cafe meals where people sit down and the crockery and cutlery are washed and reused, whereas if somebody goes into a takeaway and they buy something in non-biodegradable packaging that may take hundreds of years to break down, they don't pay back VAT.
Yes, well, that's a good theme. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, let me reflect on that. In terms of the institutional links between parties, I think, I mean, the simple point I would make is that because both we and the Greens are bottom-up parties rather than top-down, it's difficult and probably wrong to try to impose these things from the top. I mean, there are parts of the country where relations between the two parties aren't particularly good. I mean, Bristol is one of them. For mostly personal, I think, reasons as much as anything else, but there are other parts like mine where there is a real eagerness to work together because essentially we have the same views about the importance of environmental issues, we share the same views on Europe and Brexit and many other things. So I want to see us make some progress, and there is this thing called the narcissism of small differences, which people get very exercised about small things, and I think we should be big enough to put that behind us. And if there's a willingness to work with the local Greens, we should do it in a positive way.
Let Vince go away, but I think there's a question behind the column here. Did you have a question?
I think Sanders nudging me.
I want to give him a question. Last question.
Thank you all for asking. Yes, just in relation to what the young fellow over there was saying, that we need to encourage a young kind of a generation to join up, and perhaps the link with the green aspect would be a good thing. How do we go about encouraging the young generation to kind of come on board into a party that perhaps historically is seen as more kind of middle-aged?
Well, it isn't any longer. I mean, one of the things about our party now, of course, is not just that we have record levels of members, but the age of the party is actually quite young. I know that looking around the conference it doesn't look like that, but most of the members who've joined in the last 2 years tend to be 20s, 30s. We're actually a younger party than the Labour Party. Because of the large numbers of people that have joined. I mean, the problem is that most of the people who've joined us in the last 2 years have joined us for one issue only, which is around Brexit, and people feel very passionately about it, and they see us as the anti-Brexit party, and they've joined us. And the connection with the Green agenda hasn't been made, and I think we really do need to do that. As it happened again, I sit on a coordinating group with some of the Tory rebels, the Labour rebels, and also with Caroline Lucas, and we're trying to forge a cross-party approach to Brexit. And it's down, I think, to me and to her, and my colleagues and her, really to give the green dimension a stronger push.
Thank you, Vince,
Thank
for
you.
an excellent talk. It's good to see that he's mentioned one of the 5 key strands for the future being environment. But I think we'd argue that the green strand has to go across all of these different areas. We might use different language like resource efficiency and like circular economy and all those sorts of things. But it should be something which does appeal to the young particularly, but also the challenge to us to come up with policies which we can sort of give some traction to, which can be attractive and last over some time to try and feed into the whole policy process. So thank you very much for coming along.
Thank you.
That was very timely. Thank you very much, Vince. We appreciate that.